There are four principles of soil health. The first is to minimize soil disturbance. This involves minimizing tillage. Next is to maximize biodiversity. Diversity includes crop rotation, cover crops, and livestock. The third principle is to maximize living roots. This is planting of annual cover crops, and this could also include perennial crops such as alfalfa. And the fourth principle of soil health is to maximize field cover. This is keeping the soil covered and is accomplished by residue from reduced tillage and planting of cover crops. The indicators of soil health are measurable. We have more information about measurements of soil health at our website listed at this address. Soil health potentially affects crop yield and production inputs. Therefore, farm income is also measurable as a benefit of soil health. This graph gives a picture of where we are right now in the US of adopting soil health management systems. These data are from the 2017 agricultural census. We see that 37% of the planted acreage in the US is with no-till and 35% is with reduced till. Therefore, a total of 72% of the US planted acreage is in a system of what could be considered conservation tillage, a combination of no-till and reduced till. However, we see that for cover crops, only 5% of the US planted acreage is implanted with cover crops. Our objective at the Soil Health Institute is to provide farmers with the economics information they need when deciding whether to adopt these systems. The approach is with farmer surveys for collecting information for soil health management system. Our survey participants are selected farmers who have long-term experience practicing soil health management systems. And our field production data that we collect compares initial conventional practices and the adopted soil health management systems. The analytical approach is partial budget analysis, which compares costs and benefits both with and without soil health management systems. More information about this methodology is available at the Soil Health Institute website at this address. In our analysis, we conduct analysis for economics of field activities, inputs, and production. So we determine the benefits of adopting the soil health management system as well as the cost. And by taking the difference of the two, we derive the change in net farm income. Crop prices received, fertilizer prices, and fuel prices that we use are regional long-term average prices. They are not current or farm prices that are available at the time of data collection. Incentive payments such as are possibly available from USDA are omitted. These payments are often for only a limited acreage and for a limited duration, and these are not included in our analysis. This table gives a description of how cost and benefits are compared when conducting partial budget analysis for soil health management systems. On the left, we have the benefits, and on the right, we have the cost. In this example, the farmer initially was in conventional tillage with a chisel plow and a field cultivator that are now excluded when no-till is adopted. Then after comparing the planter, we see that the regular field crop planter, the cost is $18 per acre, and a no-till planter is only slightly more expensive than a no-till planter at $20 per acre. When adopting the soil health management system, 2 spray trips are omitted, one with herbicides of $9 and fungicides of $12 per acre. In our interviews, farmers often told us that after they had adopted no-till and cover crops for an extended period, they were realizing weed suppression, and they were often able to eliminate herbicide applications. Also, as these practices have been followed for a period, in many cases, the soil became, as it was becoming healthier, they were had more resistance to disease pressure, and they were also able to eliminate a fungicide application. On the soil health management system side, the cost of adopting cover crops include $20 per acre in seed. The cost of drilling the seed is $18 per acre, and these cover crops were terminated with a roller crimper. And then beyond these costs, all the other post-plant pest management practices were identical. So in partial budget analysis, you don't have to include those because they cancel out. Summing the benefits, which are reduced expenses, totaled $80 as benefits, and summing all the additional expenses of the cover crops and converting to no-till are $73. So the difference is 80 minus 73. So net farm income increases by $7 per acre. So far at the Soil Health Institute, we have conducted 3 studies with farmer survey data. Our first is with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. This is 25 farms that we have completed, and we have 5 additional farms to complete. So this will be a total of 30 farms in this ongoing study that's in collaboration with the National Association of Conservation Districts. These farms are from different regions of the US, and these are all the crops that are included in this study. Our second study is Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton. This study included 5 farms in the Cotton Belt that were producing upland cotton and also rotation crops in these 5 states. And our third study was with Cargill. This includes 100 farms in the major US corn and soybean production region. And these are the 9 states where these farmers are interviewed. As a summary of the 3 studies, the average change in net farm income for the first study with NRCS was an increase of $86 per acre. For the second study involving healthy soils for sustainable cotton, the average change in net farm income was an increase of $101 per acre. And now we're going to take a little bit more in-depth look at Cargill and determine what the change in net farm income is for these 100 farms. There were 100 farms in 9 states. The farmers that we surveyed have been practicing soil health management systems for a minimum of 5 years. They had been practicing no-till or reduced till for an average of 19 years, and those who have been planting cover crops have been doing so for an average of 9 years. The average farm size was 1,870 acres. So these farms are large commercial sized farms. These 9 states entail 72% of the US corn acres and 68% of US soybean acres. The range from north to south, mean average precipitation was 20 to 55 inches. Mean average temperature was 43 to 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The growing degree day range was 2,400 to 4,000 from north to south. This is a breakout of the acreage by crop for each of the 9 states. You see that we had a minimum of 10 farms in any state, with the most being 16 in Indiana. The average corn acreage of all the states was 855 acres for corn and 785 acres for soybean. So we don't have exactly a 50-50 breakout, but reasonably close to a 50-50 breakout of corn and soybean acreage. This graph compares the adoption of no-till, reduced till, and cover crops in our survey states as compared to the average in the US. Recall that in our initial graph of soil health management system adoption, we had 37% no-till in the US and 35% reduced till and 5% cover crops. See that for no-till and cover crops, our average state percentage of planted acreage is much greater than that of the US. For example, in Tennessee, all the farms that we interviewed, the average, all of them had production in no-till. The least amount was in Minnesota with 54%. However, Minnesota did have 46% with reduced till, for a total of all of their acreage would be conservation tillage, including no-till or reduced till. For cover crops, Michigan at 83% had the most acreage planted in cover crops. And Tennessee, which had the most in no-till, also had the least in cover crops. Only 19% of the acreage was planted to cover crops, but this is much greater than the average for the US, which is only 5%. We go back and now look at the 9-state average for each of the acreage. Our average across all the 9 states was 85% no-till, and the balance of that would have been reduced till for 100% conservation tillage. And for cover crops, the 9-state average was 53% of the acres planted to cover crops, which again compares to only 5% in the US. These are the results of change in net farm income for the partial budget analysis. We have corn and soybean. In the green column for both, we have the benefits and the cost. We see that adopting the soil health management systems for corn reduced expenses, an average of $67.06, and additional cost was $46.36. For soybean, the reduced expenses totaled $55.67, and additional expenses were $40.03. So in both cases, the reduction in expenses is much greater than the additional expenses that were required to adopt the soil health management system. The difference for corn was about $20 greater reduction than was the additional expense. And for soybean, it was about $15. The reduced expenses were more than the additional expenses. For changes in revenue, the average yield increase due to adopting the soil health management system for corn was 7.73 bushels. And we did have 2 farms that stated that they had reduced yields for corn due to adopting the soil health management system. So for the entire sample, this comes out to be 0.39 bushel. We didn't have any yield reduction for soybeans, and the average increase was 2.91 bushels. So the revenue change for both corn and soybean compared the reduced expenses, reduced revenue for corn is $32.54 compared to the reduced of $1.64. So if you sum up the benefits for corn of adopting the soil health management system, on average, it's $99.60 compared to the cost, $48. So the change in net farm income is $51.60. For soybeans, summing up all the benefits, additional revenue, and reduced expenses, the total benefits are $84.92, and the additional expenses, or the cost, additional expenses with no reduced revenue, $40.03. So the change in net farm income is $44.89. This is a distribution of the changes in net farm income for the 100 farms. We see that for corn, 85% of the farmers reported an increase in net farm income. The average increase was $52. For soybean, 88% of the farmers reported an increase in net farm income, and the average was $45 per acre. Farms included additional crops, wheat, cotton, dry edible beans, and sugar beets. We see that for these crops, also there was an increase in net farm income. For the 12 farms that had wheat, the average increase was $19 per acre. For the 7, all these were in Tennessee, the average increase in net farm income was $61 per acre. 4 farms with dry edible beans, the increase was $54 per acre. And 1 farm did have sugar beets, and the change in net farm income was $47 per acre. we did have 9 farms that had cover crops in which the cover crops were also grazed or harvested for forage. And the range in these 9 farms, an increase in net farm income from doing this secondary practice, ranged from $1.50 per acre all the way up to $570 per acre. This is additional income that's not included in the results in the table that we looked at. We also asked the farmers about any additional benefits. 84% of the farmers stated that they were able to reduce their fertilizer by adopting the soil health management system. 97% stated that they had realized increased crop resiliency by adopting the soil health management system. This means their yields are more consistent. Primarily, their crop is not as susceptible to dry periods of drought. And also 93% said that they had increased field access. This would be realized in the spring. If there had been a heavy period of rain, they would be able to get into their field and plant. In cases where other farmers around them who were still doing conventional tillage would have to wait longer and wouldn't be able to get into the field as they wanted to. Also, during the fall, if you have rainy periods, the farmers who had adopted these practices had better access to get in and go ahead and get their fields crop harvested without rutting up the field. All the farmers, 100% of the farmers, stated that these soil health practices they thought were improving the water quality. And 54% stated that they had increased their soil organic matter. And we would advise that this 54% is a result that had limited availability of historical measurements, but in many cases, as they did have measurements, 54% stated that they had increased their soil organic matter. Now let's consider a transition from conventional tillage to a soil health management system. In the day that we collected all the farmers, we began with their initial practice, what it was when it was conventional tillage. And then in the soil health management system, it's no-till or reduced-till with or without cover crops. So we get the 2 periods, initial and then the final after they have adopted the practice. Now we know from the data that we've looked at that 37% have adopted no-till and 35% have adopted reduced-till for a total of 72%, but then 5% have adopted cover crops. This means that when farmers do adopt cover crops, they do it in stages. They go to no-till and reduced-till, and then at some point later, they add cover crops. Now, when a farmer is in conventional tillage and then goes initial adoption, no-till and reduced-till, they have immediate reduced expenses. They eliminate tillage practices and then potentially add some chemicals, but usually this is a small amount when they add these chemicals to make up for the reduction in tillage. So usually going from conventional to no-till is always going to increase net farm income because it involves mostly an elimination of tillage field trips. But then when a farmer is already in no-till or reduced-till, and then they add cover crops, there's typically going to be an immediate increase in expenses. This is going to be the purchase of the cover crop seed, and then to plant the cover crop seed and to terminate the cover crop seed. So the question is, in the transition from conventional tillage to a soil health management system, what is the long-term benefit of adding cover crops to no-till? And then do the benefits compensate for the increased expenses? Well, one way to analyze this, if you have some experimental sites, you can measure the soil health indicators at these sites. You could have some comparisons that are conventional till just to no-till. And then you could also, secondly, compare conventional till to no-till, reduced till, and cover crops. You have 2 different comparisons and see which one what the difference is in the soil health indicators. Now, in our survey with Cargill, we had the 100 farmers, and for corn, we had 63 farmers with cover crops, 37 without cover crops. This would be cover crops before corn. And for soybean, there were 64 with cover crops and 36 without cover crops. So now we have the partial budget analysis broken out for those with and without cover crops. This is for corn. We see that without cover crops, the benefits total up to $45.91, reduced expenses. Additional expenses are $21.22. This is farmers just going from conventional till to no-till or reduced till. Now, with cover crops, this is farmers that have gone from conventional till to reduced expenses. And then they also have additional expenses. Of course, there are additional expenses, as we discussed earlier, are going to be greater than the additional expenses of just going to no-till or reduced till. The additional expenses are $60.22 for cover crops, and only $21.22 without cover crops. However, also the reduced expenses are much greater with cover crops. So as you practice soil health management systems with cover crops for an extended period, yes, at first you do have the additional expenses, but in the long run, your reduced expenses also increase. Now, looking at revenue with and without cover crops, for corn, the average increase was 5.76 bushels. With cover crops, the average increase was 8.56 bushels. And so through time, even for corn, counting the two that had the reduced yield were with cover crops, net farm revenue increased $24.19 for without cover crops. And then with cover crops, it increased $36.04, but only $1.64 reduction. So we see that without cover crops, total benefits are $70.10, and then additional expenses, total cost $21.22. So net farm income does increase $48.88. But with cover crops, it increased $52.20. So then this example, yes, if you do take on the additional cost of planting cover crops, eventually you do increase your net farm income. You recoup the cost of planting the cover crops, you're able to increase your net farm income. For soybean, we have a similar result. Reduced expenses without cover crops are only $35.49. We look with cover crops, your reduced expenses increase up to $72.34 compared to the additional expenses without cover crops, $23.28, and with cover crops, $51.62. Again, just like for corn with soybeans, if you plant cover crops, you do have an increase in expenses compared to without cover crops, but you also have greater reduced expenses. Again, for revenue, the average yield increase without cover crops is $2.4 bushels. And then with cover crops is 3.85 bushels. So if you calculate all the benefits, reduced expenses, and additional revenue, without cover crops, it's $59.59. Additional cost, $23.28. So increase in net farm income is $36.31. Similarly, with cover crops, we see if we add the benefits and costs, the net farm income increase even more, $59.37. So now let's just focus in on the additional expenses for corn farmers with and without cover crops. Without cover crops, the additional expenses are $18.63 compared to reduced expenses $45.91. But then with cover crops, yes, you do take on additional expenses, but in the long run, you have reduced expenses of $77.84 that are greater than the expenses. Similarly for soybeans, without cover crops, the reduced expenses are greater than the additional expenses. Without cover crops, it's $35.49. And then the additional expenses without cover crops is $21.51. Compare it with cover crops. Yes, you do take on additional expenses, $50.39 compared to $21.51. But again, your reduced expenses are much greater. So it does compensate. In the long run, the reduced expenses are greater than these additional expenses. So a summary is reduced expenses are greater than additional expenses that are incurred due to planting cover crops. However, the question is, how many years does this require? Right now, we don't have the data to determine the duration of the transition. Recall that the farmers who have been planting cover crops have been doing so for 9 years on average. This is where further research is needed to see if we can determine when do these benefits of planting cover crops kick in, so that yes, you do increase your net farm income by having reduced expenses that are greater than additional expenses. Also, other U.S. farmers could increase their net farm income by adopting the soil health management systems or reducing tillage and planting cover crops. This was the result from our 100 farms in the 9 states, and other U.S. farmers could also follow these practices and realize the same results. And then adoption efforts should focus on increasing cover crop acreage, and reduced tillage will simultaneously follow. Recall back from our graph about the current status of adopting soil health management systems, we only have 5% of the acreage that's planted into cover crops. 72% is in some combination of no-till and reduced till. And so the effort should focus on increasing cover crop, and this reduced tillage will follow simultaneously. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this work presentation today, and this is the Walton Family Foundation that has sponsored the presentation of this work that we presented today. If you have any additional questions or comments, I can be reached at this email address. And then more information about our economics work is available at this website.